from Dave Byrnes, just turned 70. In some ways it's a milestone I never wanted to reach, you know. And I can't imagine turning 80. I think the last 10 years I've certainly felt life's got a bit harder. Brisbane boy, born, moved around a lot in Australia when I was a kid. My father worked for a bank and got switched between branches here and there, so ended up mostly in Victoria. As a teenager we moved to London for 3 years, so it's where I really started running. Went to a school that had a history of, a lot of history, Tiffin Boys Grammar School for the Honest Poor, established in 1483. They had a very heavy emphasis on sport, and I started running there, mainly because I got too small for the fullback in the rugby team and was too short for a fast bowler. But they ran in Richmond Park, which was a massive park in southwest London, and I used to run cross country there and really developed the love of running there. So in my childhood, I guess that's where I became a runner. The people who couldn't play rugby and cricket were made to do running. I shone in that crowd because they weren't particularly interested in the sport. But whenever the school cross country came around, there were always a couple of guys in the rugby team who always cleaned me up. So I never felt like I was a great athlete. I felt like I was a reasonable athlete, but I sort of developed the love of it. They had a great club there called the All-Weather Running Club, so this is in mid-60s London, and they used to run up to the gates of of Richmond Park, which was about 2.5 miles away. And so if you ran up there every Tuesday night and Thursday night and then back again right through the English winter, so the weather was pretty abysmal sometimes. At the end of the school year you got a cloth badge called an All-Weather Running Club badge, which I've still got. So that's nearly as old as I am, that badge. And Richmond Park was a great place to run. That's where I first sort of wondered how far I could run and ran round and stuff. So I ran for enjoyment. I got some satisfaction out of it. I could beat people if I did enough running, but I never felt like I was going to be a star. My father got moved back to Australia halfway through my HSC year, really, so I moved back to Melbourne and got into Melbourne Boys High. I was only there for really 2 terms while I finished my HSC, and they had running as a sport as well, and they used to go down to the tan track and run a couple of laps of the tan track on sports afternoons. And they also had an old boys running club, Melbourne High School Old Boys, which was quite a well-known club, more for sprinters than for distance runners, and they were pretty happy to have me because I think it made up about 3 who could score in sort of the longer track events, but they had some really good sprinters and hurdlers and stuff like that. So I started competing with them regularly, probably at the end of my HSC year, so around 18, 19, and mixed with some people who became great athletes. Chris Wardlaw he and I used to battle it out in the C-grade 1500 metres on a Saturday. He went on to run for Australia at Moscow and become the Australian Olympic coach in years after that. It's a friendship I value over the time, and he was at Monash University, where I went after I left high school, and eventually I teamed up with some other runners who I met at Monash, and switched clubs to what became Q Camberwell Athletic Club in Melbourne. But I also ran with the university a lot, but it was an incredible time at Monash University. It was almost impossible to get into the good teams. All the guys who ran my distances, 1500, 3000, 10,000, they were all Australian representatives, national, so you train with them, but you never beat them. It was mixing with great athletes, and you sort of saw how they trained, and it was in the days when people started to say, you have to run at least 100 miles a week if you want to be a serious runner. And so I started running those kind of distances, and I did see improvement, along with sort of more injuries, but that was sort of, I think that's where I thought, if I just train hard enough or harder than other people, then I'll get better and maybe beat people. Around that time I also got drafted to national service, so I went in the army as a runner, you immediately became noticed in the army because they had some sort of cross countries for recruits, and I went in pretty fit, having done my first couple of 100-mile weeks just before I went in, and so I'd clean up in the cross country, and then I went to officer training up at Skyville outside Sydney, and 2 days after we arrived, they had their sort of quarterly cross country, and I cleaned up that by so far. They'd never seen anybody. So suddenly, it was good for the ego, but it was also good for getting known. Within 3 days of arriving, everybody knew who I was, even if they didn't know who anybody else was. And I think that always helped me through my running career. And the army really looked after me in a way. They weren't sending people or mine was the first intake. They didn't send anybody to Vietnam. So there was sort of choice of postings, and they posted me back near Melbourne because of my running career. So I spent a year at Puckapunyal outside Melbourne, still running in the Melbourne running scene, but at Puckapunyal during the week.
Few sharp lefts coming up. Okay.
After the army and university, I still sort of trained myself, and I just kept running harder and harder, and ran a few marathons. I'd run my first at 19 in probably my first year at university, and done okay. Ran under 3 hours, 2:44 as a 19-year-old, but still like 7th or something like that. But I thought this is where I can excel, sort of, if I really devote myself, and so through my 20s I kept running, but never really had a breakthrough run. Could only run in the 2:30s around then, which was sort of so-so in those days. There were plenty of runners running better than that, but I'd sort of pick up minor, second place or first place in some minor marathon in country Victoria. I think I was the first Australian in a Victorian Marathon Club race. A New Zealander won it, and they had an exchange with a marathon in New Zealand at Hamilton, and so my prize for being the first Victorian was a trip to the Hamilton Marathon. And this was probably around about 77, 78, and I got over there, and fortuitously for me the course was I think a bit short, and so I ran quite well. I ran 10 minutes faster than I'd ever run before in a marathon, in 2:22, and couldn't believe it at the time. It was such a huge chunk to take off, and it's worth noting that friends who ran that marathon and got PBs never improved on that time, so I am pretty sure it was a short course, but it gave me some self-belief, and then when I came back to Victoria, then I started to run around 2:20s, and had some, in the late 70s and early 80s, had some good successes, rarely winning, but a couple of 2:19s. That was a 1979 Victorian Championship, and De Castella's first marathon, and I again ran second to De Castella, so I couldn't even see him at the end, but he happily destroyed the rest of the field for me, and I cleaned them all up in the last 10k. Passing them one by one, the Australian champion, the Victorian champion.
Must have felt good.
Well, it did feel good in 2:19, 2:19.06, and it was a breakthrough. I know a lot of my fellow runners never thought I could run that kind of time in that kind of company. So you get self-belief, and around the same time I started to run good times on the track as well, and all done on the basis of 100 miles a week training, and when I really got serious, 140 miles a week, 20 miles every day, so that's what, 240k or something like that a week. But there were lots of injuries, 3 Achilles tendon operations, 1 knee operation, stress fracture in my lower back, displaced vertebrae, all these kinds of things. I always sort of wanted to find out where the edge was, and often sort of just stepped over it, and that's pretty much been the story of my running career, I think. Always thinking that more might be better, and then finding out that I'd just taken it one step too far or whatever. But I never really gave up that an injury was going to be career ending or something. I always figured that if I just had some time off and got on the bike or something for a while, that I would get fit again. And as I've got older, I think you become mentally tougher even if you become physically less able. So maybe you find the edge more often and you have more injuries just because your body has absorbed so much punishment over the years. Back in those days, if I got injured, I always felt like on the comeback, once the injury was done, if I just could run maybe 40k every second or third day for 2 or 3 weeks, I'd be back to my best, and that's the way it worked. And long miles have always got me fit. So I still feel that if I could just run 30k frequently, I would get fit and be able to beat them. But I think that's what happens in age. You're mentally, your mental potential always exceeds your physical potential, and so you believe you can do that. I still believe I could run reasonable times for a 10k and for a marathon if I could just do the training, but my body just won't let me do the training. The head's in the right place, but I think your body just catches up with you, and I think that's the ageing process. I'm sure I'm not the first one to think that way. But I feel like I've been fortunate in that many of the runners that will easily beat me now at my age, the 70-year-olds and the 60-year-olds, they came to running late. They're very talented, they train hard, and they'll generally run faster times than me, but they'll always be thinking to themselves, if only I'd got into this when I was in my prime, what might I have done? And I always feel like I always found out what I might have done, and I explored my limits and benefited. Had the benefit of doing it in my prime, and so although it irks me that I can't run as well as I think I could run at my age, I have that feeling of, I did have my good times, and I appreciate them, and I'm happy to let other people have the glory now, because they missed out on the bits that I managed to do. I really doubt that there's many 70-year-olds who have run as many miles in their life as me, because I've been running long distance since I was 15, pretty much, and there's been a lot of miles over those years. I was a heavy trainer, and so I'm probably lucky to get this far. Even in the last 10 years, I've had injuries where I've been told that that's probably the end of it, a bad knee injury, a bad heel injury, but a year or two, your body adapts. I think if you've got a weakness, you change your gait a little bit subconsciously just to ease the pain, and then you develop muscles, and you might run with a limp, or you might swing your arm out a bit wider than your left arm, more widely than your right arm, or something like that. But your body adapts, and I really do believe you gradually overcome it. So with the current hip problem, sure, I may need to get a hip replaced. I'm not looking forward to that. I have 2 younger brothers who had their hips replaced. They still lead active lives. Maybe I won't be running the long runs, but I know that the benefits of the exercise are huge compared to the effort you put in. So I'll do something. At the moment I'm on the bike. I think I do believe I'll get back to some running. I like hiking. I've done a lot of good hikes. I've got a bucket list of other things I want to do, so I'll just keep going. And sure, I often think I overstep the mark and I just do too much and I get myself injured and into trouble. But I think as soon as I stop having that attitude, I'll run in ever decreasing circles and won't have the life benefits of health that I have had. I mean, I talk about injuries, but generally I'm okay. I'm not on any medication. My blood pressure's good, and the exercise keeps me certainly thinner than I would be otherwise. It allows me to eat more than I would. So it's worth investing that hour or two a day to get the other 22 or 23 hours of benefit. So Even with the hip, if I can't run, I'll definitely be doing something that gets my heart rate up each day, that has a long element to it, maybe a long bike ride on weekends, so there's some endurance built in, and then the rest of the time enjoy the good health that I think that brings. The good sleep at night, I might go to bed tired and sleep well and wake up and look forward to getting some exercise. Yeah, it has right through my life. I think when I've got serious injuries, I've got on the bike and ridden, and that's something I can do easily. I've got a course around here where I don't have to go out for hours to get a good workout. It's got some big hills in it. I think generally with hip replacements you can still ride a bike, so I'm anticipating that, you know, for at least another 10 years till I get to the next milestone, I'll still be doing plenty of exercise and enjoying it. I retired early, and since then I've tried to do something, have some adventure every year. Often that's been hiking, sometimes it's been biking. Way back in 1986, before I had the job overseas, I was in America and I hiked the Appalachian Trail, which goes up the east coast of America, about I think 4,000 kilometres, 3,600 kilometres. I just loved that life. I think it ticks all my boxes. It was endurance, it was outdoors, it was new experiences every day. I've done a few hikes in Australia, alpine walking track, human hovel track, and went over and did the Pacific Crest Trail in 2017, so 3 years ago, which runs up the west coast of America, nearly 5,000 kilometres long. Loved it, had a great time, had life-threatening experiences, all the adrenaline, but all the endurance and stuff as well. And this year, like many people, had plans destroyed by the pandemic, but we were, Julie and I, going to go and hike the Continental Divide Trail, which goes up the middle of America and completes what they call the Triple Crown in America of long distance hikes. So I'm still hoping, even with a replaced hip, to get back and do that, maybe not in 2021, but 2022. I've still got my Qantas voucher and my travel insurance. So that's another benefit of fitness, that I can do that. Even at my age, I can still hike the 40 kilometres a day if I have to, carrying a pack. I'd like to think I can keep going the next 10 years anyway. I recognise at some point things are going to slow down. Life's punctuated equilibrium. I think you sort of go along for a while and things are okay, and then there's always an event which sort of derails you for a while, and then you come back slightly less able than you were before to do the things you could before, but then you get used to that and you find the range of things you can do that, and then the next event happens, and then you reassess your objectives. Back in 2005 with my club Terrigal Trotters, we set up the Great North Walk hundreds as it was then, now Great North Walk Ultras, and I'm still heavily involved in organising that. I love running, and I love seeing people find running and enjoy it and become as passionate about it as I am. So that still burns in me to try and do that. And a race like the Great North Walk Ultras, it introduces people to a fantastic sport, and you get great pleasure out of seeing people sort of discover their potential, do things that they never believed they could do. So still enjoying that. I often say I want to do the same things, just slower, in all aspects of life. And I think it's true that you can do that. You can do those things, but you've got to keep at it, and there's always going to be niggles and injuries and stuff. It's never easy, but what's the alternative? So you've got to keep pushing the edge of the envelope, keep going a bit further than is comfortable, because you get the benefit eventually.